Even though I still had feelings for her, I couldn't stand her anymore, and as for the kids, I was overwhelmed. Just the thought of them made me nauseous, and I rushed to the bathroom and threw up all the Jack Daniels I'd drank, costing me $30. Our story began over a decade ago when I had an accident at work and injured my arm and needed stitches. It was Janice, an ER nurse, who attended to me that day, and despite my attempts to flirt with her, she remained professional and focused on her job. She was a stunning woman, with dark hair and a ponytail, long legs, and a well-proportioned, attractive body, and she gave me a shot of Novocaine to numb the pain, then stitched up the wound. It's strange how when you notice someone you realize they're everywhere. It's as if you buy a new car and suddenly you see them everywhere on the road. It's the same with Janice. I often notice her in the city, usually with a man who seems to make her happy. There seems to be an argument between them and in the end he leaves her alone. Janice is sitting with her friend. Janice was sitting with her friend. Obviously annoyed, I hurriedly turned away so as not to draw attention to myself, but I couldn't help overhearing her saying that her boyfriend was jealous. She was annoyed and expressed her displeasure. Thought it was time to leave. 2 weeks later I saw Janice again at the bar, this time without her boyfriend. The band was playing a song that I liked and I walked up to her table. "Hi. I don't know if you remember meeting me a couple of months ago at the I don't know if you remember me from the ambulance a few months ago. My name is Simon. I'm Simon. Would you like to dance?" After thinking about it for a while she said yes. That night our relationship started and I felt so happy. We dated for a month and then we got intimate. Janice wasn't pushy and I respected her pace. Our first intimacy was like something out of a romance novel. We had dinner at an Italian restaurant with pasta, wine and trompe l'oeil. It was a perfect night. I didn't plan on getting Janice drunk, but I did plan on getting her drunk. But I did plan on getting her drunk. But I did plan on getting her drunk. But I didn't plan on getting her drunk. But I did plan on getting her drunk. But I didn't plan on getting her drunk. But I did plan on getting her drunk. I didn't intend to get Janice drunk, but I hoped it would help her relax a little. But nothing compared to that memorable night with Janice. She was very passionate, and her past experience in the bedroom didn't matter to me, as long as she was with me and only me. For months after our first meeting, I took Janice back to the bar where we had first met, and she was happy to oblige, and we chose the first Saturday in June to get married. 2 months after the engagement I was hanging out at the bar with a friend when Janice's ex-boyfriend walked by our table and was about to leave because she and I only started dating after you guys broke up, to which I replied that he assured me that there was no hard feelings between us. He said that he had his own reasons for breaking up and if we decided to get married, good luck to us, especially considering Janice's quirks with exclusivity. I spent 2 days in the hospital for therapy for 2 days, and when I woke up I couldn't continue playing until the end of the season. This incident gave me a lot of motivation to study. That's why I dropped out of college and got a job at a local construction company. After 10 years I lost my mother and had no siblings or distant relatives. I felt so empty until I found Solace and Janice, Penny's mother, who was like a parent to me. I am a Finnish carpenter specializing in restoration projects, and I am considered one of the best on the West Coast at restoring old homes for wealthy clients, charging $75 to $100 an hour and earning about $150,000 a year. But that also means I have to travel, and spending a week or 2 a month away from home to deal with wealthy clients can be difficult because they sometimes treat you like you're an insignificant person. I once worked for a young actress in Los Angeles who had bought a 10,000-foot house and spent millions of dollars restoring it, and while I was working in it she was often lying naked by the pool and didn't seem to be aware of my presence. In another case, while working on a house in Beverly Hills, I witnessed how the lady of the house cheated on me with a boy by the pool in broad daylight. Although I felt bad for his wife's cheating behavior, I decided not to argue with him in case it was part of their agreement, and I didn't want to upset him by finding out that his wife was cheating on him. It showed that their marriage wasn't what it appeared to be, and now I was faced with my own dilemma. I had 2 children with Janice, and that's where my stupidity came in. But before you judge too harshly, keep in mind that when Janice told me that she was pregnant with her first child, when Jacob was born, I arrived at the hospital 30 minutes after Penny's phone call was made, having already made arrangements to schedule nothing, but I had already arranged my schedule to only work locally. Janice was ready to go into labor, and I was reviewing Llama's classes and ready to be with her when she went into labor. 3 hours later, the doctor announced that labor had begun, and little Jacob was born. Since many new dads tend to get nervous or faint at such moments, I couldn't help but be shocked when the nurse handed Jacob over to me, and I noticed that he seemed to have gotten a tan. "Simon, we should have told you earlier, but now it's time to find out the truth. My father is of mixed race, and we're worried that if you find out that Janice has such roots, you won't marry her," Penny explained in confusion, to which I replied, "It doesn't make sense, Penny, what's it got to do with me?" I then told the story of the wrestler who ended my career, assuring Penny of my belief in the impermissibility of discrimination, and Penny, relieved, emphasized the importance of my love and acceptance of our son Jacob. She also mentioned her brother who lives in Denver and showed me a picture of a man in her wallet. "This was my brother Henry." She said he was a few years younger than me and that this caused us some problems when we were out and about with the family. People used to stare at him or ask inappropriate questions. I discovered that each of them had their own private space that reflected their personalities. Henry's room was filled with sports memorabilia and family photographs, while Penny's room was filled with artwork and books. It was clear that they were two separate individuals living under the same roof. Although I was upset at first, I later realized that their closeness was simply a result of their close bond as brother and sister. I was relieved that they each had their own space, but appearances can be deceiving. The second child, a girl, was named after my mother, Jenny. After the baby was born, I felt that a family of 4 would be perfect for us, and now that we had 2 healthy children, a boy and a girl, it seemed like too much. During a conversation involving medical topics, I inadvertently mentioned to Sharon the catheterization device that Janice was using. Sharon wisely advised me to choose another method, as long-term use of the catheterization device could cause problems. After much consideration, I decided to surprise Janice with the news of my sterilization on Valentine's Day. It may not be the most romantic gift, but it definitely beats a household appliance. As I browsed through Penthouse Letters magazine, I came across several provocative stories, some of which caused me concern, such as husbands watching their wives with other men or wives looking for men of high moral character. I rushed to hand in the sample before I finished reading the stories, so I never found out if this was an isolated case. Afterward, I gave the sample to the nurse and informed her that I would be back next week. Face to face, I agreed to come in this afternoon, but the thought kept running through my head that given my family's history of untimely deaths, there might be something seriously wrong found in my sperm. I told him that I had been kicked in the groin during a wrestling match, which had caused severe swelling and required hospitalization. The doctor then told me that this injury would likely lead to infertility problems because the sperm count was extremely low and natural conception was highly unlikely. As I left the clinic, I felt numb, almost like a character from The Walking Dead. I knew I needed to find out the truth about my life without arousing Janice's suspicions. After finishing my drink, I went through the list of tasks in the bartender's notebook, which usually consisted of checking on the kids, contacting Fred, talking to her father, protecting my finances, getting tested for sexually transmitted diseases, finding a new place to live, finding out the truth, and getting back at Fred. When I woke up the next morning with a stabbing headache, despite Janice's disapproval of my drinking so late in the day, I waved her away and pretended everything was fine. My first lie of the day was to tell Janice that Fred was depressed, and we ended up having a drink together that day. Year-old daughter, I took saliva swabs from the kids and myself and sent them to the clinic for analysis, after which I went to the bank and opened my own checking account. When I returned from Florida, Larry Adonis had a charter fishing boat in cargo, and he was surprised by my surprise visit, but agreed to meet me. Larry was a handsome man, slender, with florid hair and a tan as dark as a Greek fisherman's, and he noticed me in the crowd, and he may have recognized me from the Christmas card Janice sent him, which had a picture of the family on it. "I'm a scoundrel because I abandoned my family, but let me explain why I'm here in Calago," he went on and started telling the story. Janice had been playing basketball since elementary school. By high school she had enough experience to join the AE team's travel team. Everything seemed to be going well the first year, but by the second year things were different. The boys and girls on the elite team began to travel together more frequently, sometimes twice a month. Janice began to take an interest in one of the elite boys, Henry Bishop Jr., to distinguish him from his father, Henry Bishop Jr. "Simon, you see how it is that Henry Jr. traveled with the boys as an escort." Then it was discovered that Bishop Sr.'s mother was white, and Bishop Jr.'s mother was white, and finally it was discovered that the younger one came up to Janice's room every night, and that Penny spent the night with the older one, and it seemed like a mutually beneficial relationship. It seemed like a mutually beneficial arrangement until one of their parents took pity on me and warned me about what was going on despite Penny's attempts to downplay the situation and claim that it had only happened twice. The truth came out, but it was a lie, and I went ahead with the divorce. The most painful part of all of this was the betrayal, so I left Oregon and moved here and never looked back. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Simon, but there's a good chance that 2 of your kids aren't yours, and I don't understand Larry. If she's involved with this guy, why she didn't marry him instead of me, because my friend, both of Henry's kids, are trouble-prone, and often end up in jail on their first try, and Henry Jr. got busted for selling illegal drugs to an undercover police officer when he was just 20 years old, a sophomore in college, on a basketball scholarship, but he followed in his father's footsteps, and just like Henry Sr., Henry Jr. always wanted more money, more cars, more women, everything. My informant found out that he got out of prison a year before your son was born, and before Jacob was born he got in trouble again, served another 18 months for a felony, but I decided not to do it because I don't know you and I don't think it's my right. I was under the mistaken impression that everything was fine with you, and it turns out that you're not fine at all. I've heard that you're a skilled carpenter, and that you're very successful with your business. It takes wisdom to do that. Let me share what I've learned over the years. Insights. I've been on boats and fished with so-called smart people. Most of them are only successful in 1 or 2 areas, and they do use that knowledge as a shield. Let me tell you more details. Penny claimed to have only been with Henry twice. I was skeptical, so she agreed to take a lie detector test. She passed the expert, asked the questions a few times, and the results stayed the same. Penny was telling the truth, but something didn't feel right to me. So I had Janice take the test. Penny was furious and verbally abusive of me for subjecting my daughter to this torture. I thanked Larry for the information. He offered to buy me a drink and dinner, but I declined. It was time for me to go back to the home to plan my next step. Having dinner with me, he gave me a lot of valuable advice and suggested that I use an attorney who was as aggressive as his wife instead of hiring my own. I decided not to use video surveillance because I couldn't stand the thought of seeing my wife with someone else at night. I came back from my fake work trip and told Janice a story about meeting with a famous reality TV star. The Seattle clients were a delightful couple with impeccable taste and lots of money, which was a nice distraction from my boring week. As I listened to the recordings of Janice and her lover engaging in intimate encounters during the week, I was expecting to be disappointed, but in the midst of my disappointment, I stumbled upon a Frankenstein conversation between Janice's lover and another person. I'd recently been given valuable information about a great opportunity. Janice had overheard an elderly couple talking about an upcoming trip to Israel. She'd managed to gather enough details at the clinic to get them to understand that it would be an easy job. Janice had even found their address, which turned out to be in a nice part of town. I found myself in a dilemma. I didn't know whether to report Janice and turn her lover over to the police. While it would be satisfying to see Janice punished, I didn't like the idea of someone else's children being put in jail with their parents, and at that moment I couldn't help but feel indifferent to Janice's children, who, because of my own unhealed wounds, could be put in jail with her and my lying mother. For the next month, I kept my cool and approached Janice carefully, and while I was away from work, hidden cameras continued to record footage that captured her lover unknowingly revealing details of an impending robbery to his partner, and when he and his accomplice left the scene of the crime, I pretended I wasn't at home and parked my rental car near my house. I called the police on my disposable cell phone, pretending to be a concerned neighbor. But that changed when I told the police that on the eve of the robbery I had placed a tool under the driver's seat of Henry's van, which strangely enough didn't stop me from sleeping at night. Let's just say a good friend gave it to me and I deleted the serial number so it wouldn't be linked to Henry. As a repeat offender, he's prohibited from possessing the tool, and if he's found in possession of it, he could be sentenced to a long prison term under the state's 3 strikes law, and I know he's committing a crime. I completed the first phase of my plan, and when I got home the next day, Janice was sitting in the living room in tears, and Uncle Henry was sitting in my favorite chair with a pained look on his face. As she was talking, I couldn't help but notice how easily her tears flowed. It dawned on me that Janice had learned to cheat from her mother. It dawned on me that I would never learn the truth from her, but before thinking further, I decided to drop my own bombshell. But it was the divorce papers. It was over between us, and their shocked expressions were priceless. Like something out of a sitcom, I didn't say another word. I got in my truck and drove the selfie east. Janice was supposed to get a formal notice from my attorney's office the next day. I wrote in my letter, Janice, you're a liar. My attorney will be handling our divorce. I'm leaving you the house, but I'm taking everything out of our account except for $33,000. I know the kids aren't my own and I'm going to miss them, but I can't bear to look at them. Because I know the circumstances under which they were born. Perhaps Henry can use his resources in prison to support his 2 children. If Henry remains silent and you don't agree to my terms, I won't hesitate to notify the authorities and ask them to check the clinic's records to find out. Rest assured, I won't hesitate to carry out my threats and take pleasure in doing so. Do not attempt to contact me in any way after learning the truth about you and your mother. I won't wish you luck, because that would be hypocritical. Go to hell and tell your horrible mother that she's invited to. Phase 2 of my revenge is complete. Phase 3 will require some patience, but if all goes well, it's going to be a lot of fun. I managed to buy 2 swarms of carpenter ants online in the past month. It's amazing what you can buy on the internet these days. While visiting Penny's house, I snuck into her basement and placed the ant colony in a hidden corner. Over the next few years, these ants would gradually weaken the structure of the rafters and walls, eventually rendering the house beyond repair. At first, I was happy to take on this responsibility as a sign of gratitude to the woman who had been like a second mother to me, but that all changed when I revealed her involvement in the fraudulent scheme. No one will suspect anything until the inevitable moment when they will sue for the damage caused by the ants. The Sicilians say that revenge is a dish best served cold, and in this case, it was my turn to serve up a dish of revenge that Penny couldn't forget. With Larry's help, I sold the truck and bought a boat in the Florida Keys. It would take time to get a foothold in the Caribbean, but I was capable of doing it. I also finished the interiors of 2 mega yachts owned by Saudi princes. After 3 years on the islands, I found myself in a good financial position, with more money coming in than going out, and let me tell you, I've lived happily ever after. As far as dating women goes, it's almost inevitable in a place where many women are looking for adventure. I made it clear to everyone that they should not tell Janice where I was or how I could be reached. The year after I went on vacation to the island, I convinced Fred and his wife Emily to go with me to St. Martin and spend a week on my yacht. I parked the boat about 40 feet from the dock, backed up another 100 feet, and turned off the engine as I had hoped. Just then my cell phone rang. It was Fred. Fred, what's going on? I asked Fred, who explained that Janice had been pestering Emily about me, practically forcing her to come on our trip. Emily made it very clear that if Fred didn't agree to take Janice with him, he wouldn't do anything next year. I assured Fred that he wouldn't be flying alone next year since he had already closed his part of the deal, but he wouldn't be on the boat this week, and I suggested that Fred go home or try to go to the casino hotel since there weren't usually that many people there at this time of year. And as I finished talking, I heard screams coming from the dock, and Emily and Janice were obviously very upset, and I called Kylie, who was a school teacher I'd met at a party on the deck last year. Kelly had traveled with me around the island over the summer, and she was incredibly beautiful. Despite the fact that we were on friendly terms, she seemed to exude an air of sophistication and elegance which immediately appealed to me, and despite my initial crush on her, I tried to keep it professional and focus on my work. But as time went on, I found myself thinking about her all the time, looking for reasons to spend time with her, and I even found excuses to strike up a conversation with her in hopes of getting to know this fascinating woman better. So, on the last day of my stay on the island, I mustered up the courage to confess my feelings to her, and to my surprise and delight, she reciprocated, and we spent a marvelous evening together under the stars. As I looked out the window at the crystal clear waters of the Caribbean Sea, I knew I was ready to take on any challenge, as long as she was by my side. I wanted to tell her that I just wanted her to stay away from me. I'm sorry, miss. You can continue to stay here. It's convenient for your parents to stay here while I'm at work. And she added, please continue to use the guest house because I know there's a gentleman nearby that I can trust. The next week was like a dream for me because Simone embodied the classic stereotype of the French woman I had seen in movies. She would make us lunch so we could enjoy it together on the terrace. The first time we ate together, we laughed at the resemblance of our names. Simone had a great sense of humor, and I always tried to make her laugh. As time passed, my infatuation turned to love. In the end, it was she who dissolved the tension between us. Simone, I saw the way you were looking at me, But let me tell you what I saw in you. I saw a wonderful man who overcame adversity with grace. You didn't let the pain consume you. Still find joy in life. I try to be a good person and I honestly believe in that, so please don't doubt yourself and see me as a woman who fell in love with an amazing man. I couldn't believe my luck when this amazing woman showed interest in me. We shared passionate moments, after which she offered to move into my room and we made love. I pulled out all the stops, remembering everything Janice had taught me about how to please a woman, and she kept exclaiming, "Oh my God," and we continued to do it for hours until we both fell asleep exhausted. I could have been content with that, with my new life, but there was one more thing I needed to do, and after 5 years of marriage to Simone, and 10 years after my breakup with Janice, I realized it was time to move on and fully embrace this new chapter in my life, my wife, and our 2 adorable children. History 2. You know I'm supposed to be at work right now, but I'm surprisingly at peace, sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying a freshly brewed cup of coffee. I used to do this all the time when our kids were little, and I would get up an hour earlier than the rest of the family just to enjoy the peace and quiet, which is kind of my hobby. My name is Evan Johnson, and I've been happily married for 25 years to be exact. We have 4 children, the last of which moved away last year, and my wife seems to be struggling with what she calls empty nest syndrome, so I've been encouraging her to find a hobby, and I think she found one about an hour ago, and I don't know his name. She just keeps calling him Stallion and encouraging him with phrases like, "Stallion, go for it, baby, I know you can do it," and Audrey seems preoccupied, which probably explains why she doesn't notice the scent of the coffee, but more. Words were exchanged between them, and she asked him to tell her how much better he was than her spineless husband, to which he replied, "Oh my God, you're so much better than him." I'm not sure how much time I had, but judging by the duration of their activities in my bedroom, it seemed like I had plenty of time, as I had no intention of ever entering the place again. And because I overheard my wife saying that she wished they'd have sex more often, damn baby, we've got to find a way to see each other 2 or 3 times a week instead of once in a while. And I forgot my briefcase in the garage because I left it there to get the cat out from under the hood, and there's nothing quite like the sound of a cat getting caught up in the belt of a fan, not to mention the sound of that flying around. And Clarence isn't smart enough, and apparently I'm not either. Smart enough that you should never let that weakling called your husband touch you again. I swore my briefcase wasn't that important, so I left it, but I had to meet a client and he drove me straight to my house anyway. I turned onto my street and immediately saw a black and white police car parked in front of the door, and I thought something terrible had happened to my dear wife. I pulled into the driveway and almost hit my wife's brand new silver Lexus LS sedan. Her plaster garden gate wasn't so lucky. I ran into the house without even closing the door. Oh my God, I've never felt so good. It's killing me. I don't want coffee. I'm dying for whiskey, but I guess I still need a clear head. I have to admit their passionate screams are disturbing me. Seeing this scene is even harder, but I have to see it even if it's just in order to get the necessary video and audio. Seeing them roll around in my bed wasn't the most disturbing part. The most upsetting part was the verbal humiliation that my wife inflicted on me. "God, you're so much better than Evan. Give it to me, baby, give it all to me." Apparently it really irritated her lover because the whole house started to shake and the bed shook with it as curses and grunts went up. And let me tell you that when your wife and her lover sleep in your marital bed, you'll be shocked. Yes, they did it on my side. My wife panting and riding him cowboy style, telling her lover how much it turned her on. That's when I ran to the bathroom, bent over the toilet and threw up my breakfast. I'm surprised they didn't hear or smell my breakfast. I guess they were preoccupied with their activities at the time. He was in great shape and my wife didn't match him very well. I may not be a nacho, but why go for someone else's wife who is in great shape? Then I heard my wife ask what that smell was. Her boyfriend didn't answer. All I heard was her exclaim, "Oh my God." There was a lot of commotion, opening and closing closet doors, dresser drawers and laundry baskets. I guess they were cleaning up evidence of their affair. They saw me at the same time. Audrey shrieked because I was right there, and so did her lover. He glanced at his uniform and it seemed to be popped out. "It's not a stud there, it's your service arm. Your boss took it with him when he left." I think what really upset him was that the serial number had been removed. It was like 5 to 7 years ago. Like I said, he's a thoughtful guy, and like I said, we had a nice chat while you guys were busy upstairs. Audrey quickly glanced out the window at the street. "Yes, he took the patrol car as well. Your boss mentioned that you were providing security at the construction site. He was going to take your uniform as well, but he thought that you might be able to use it when you left here. He would have taken your uniform, but he thought you might need it when you left town. But where was I? You could have called your wife to give you a lift home, but probably not. She was too angry about the video I sent her. It's hard for me to understand what she's talking about, but it has to do with her father, who's the chief of police. How could you do this to your children? She told me about your children. You seem to have a good family despite the circumstances. I was kind of enjoying myself. At this point it was like a fish on a line. I was just reeling it in. The police impounded your car, Audrey, because there were a few ounces of unidentified marijuana in the front seat. Don't worry, he said you'd be able to pick it up in a few days after they've done all the forensics. My God, at this point she wasn't screaming, it was more like a moan of sadness akin to the lone bloodhound howling at the moon. Officer, I think it's time for you to put on your uniform and leave. After he left, my wife finally regained her ability to speak. I'm sorry. I'm overreacting. You know I love you. Of course I love you, Evan. How could you doubt that? Except for the cheating thing. Oh, honey, I never did any of that stuff. It was just a conversation in the bedroom to get us in the mood. Wait, you said you overreacted, Evan. What did you do? She looked annoyed. Evan, what did you do? I thought they'd be happy for you. That's what I did. Jesus Christ, you didn't. I just nodded my head. I also forgot to mention one thing, but you probably already know this. Your lover's wife works for the same company as you. I think she said she's the executive assistant to the CEO. I know most cheating husbands are in denial, but I'm not a macho kind of guy. I'm going to take a little time off and then go on a long fishing vacation to drown my sorrows, like in that song about fishing in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. She mentioned giving the pictures to your father, but maybe that's just in case a police officer wants to do something bad with you, or maybe she wants to see if anyone's interested in dating you. Honey, I don't mean to be mean, I just want everyone to know who your new partner is, and that your friends on Facebook seem to be so happy for you, and that Audrey is practically cracking up. Honey, it's time to dress and get ready for the packing, and your parents should be here soon to pick you and I up. Of course you'll need a place to live. As part of the divorce the house had to be sold. I told her later that you seemed to be having some problems after the divorce, dear, which surprised me when I found out. What did you think was going to happen? Should we continue to have this pointless conversation? It was quiet upstairs. She didn't say a word, just the occasional whimper and sob. Why do people who cheat always cry when they get caught? About 10 minutes later she came downstairs fully dressed but without her suitcase. Evan, honey, we really have to go. Then I heard her parents' car pull up in front of our house. Goodbye, Audrey. As usual, I opened the door for her, and as a gentleman, 3 o'clock that night didn't happen as expected. The house was awfully quiet and I couldn't find my wife Helen and our children. Helen and I were married to Mike Lewis 11 years. When I realized the silence, I noticed a note on the table. Mike, I'm sorry I can't tell you this to your face, but I'm too much of a coward to face you. I've met someone else and fallen in love. The children are safe with me. The divorce papers were in an envelope underneath the note. I paced up and down in the kitchen, cursing and flipping through the divorce papers. Finally slumped in my chair. Helen had left me the house and all our money to me, taking only clothes and toys for herself and the kids. Most infuriating of all was the last request. Helen wanted me to sign the children's adoption agreement to allow her new partner to adopt them. Helen explained that she had met and fallen in love with another person, as she had mentioned in her note. Helen asked me to refrain from swearing and behave in a civilized manner, and after showering and changing I went out for a bite to eat as I wasn't in the mood to cook. My friend Paul spotted me in the bar and was interested in my rare appearance and asked if I had been away from my family tonight. Paul expressed his surprise at learning that Helen was divorcing me and commented that he hadn't expected this to happen. I confirmed that it was indeed the same person and shared his suspicion that she was in love with Henry Castlake. Paul asked me about the nature of the form and I explained that she wanted me to give him the child for adoption and emphasized that this was impossible. Paul shook his head in disgust and made a remark about Motor Lake. I signed the divorce papers, and despite Helen's best efforts to persuade me, she eventually gave in. Chloe was 10 and Lee was 8 at the time of the divorce. I wanted to get back at Lake, but I didn't want to go to jail for it. I didn't show up for work on Monday. Strangely enough, no one came after me. Part of the reason I got back at Lake had nothing to do with me. The word got out about the conversation I had with Paul. 3 months later, Helen and Castlake got married and I babysat for them for a week while they went on their honeymoon. What upset me was the question of my daughter Chloe. Dad, why did you send us to live with Mom and Henry? The first didn't send you. Your mother took you away because she didn't love me anymore. You could have stayed here if I'd said so. I told Helen to stop lying and urged her to tell the children the truth. I warned her that if she didn't I would tell her, and I mentioned that the children knew that I didn't ask her to take them and I would have fought for custody if I could. Helen walked away. Frustrated after being married for so long, some of my friends wanted to introduce me to someone, but I didn't want to date. I wanted to love, but wasn't in the mood. My neighbors were Gary and Emily, who moved in after Helen left. Emily was a secretary and Gary was a military veteran, and we got along so well. They seemed to be a good couple. Whenever we ran into each other we had a friendly talking. Tragedy struck. When Gary had a health crisis at work, paramedics and doctors arrived quickly. I offered her my sympathy. As her parents were on vacation, I walked her home, poured us drinks, listened to her and shared her plans for the future. Emily cried herself to sleep on my couch. I covered her with a blanket and slept in a chair in case she woke up in the middle of the night. The next morning Helen was dropping off the kids when Emily left. Glad to see you didn't waste any time, Mike. Come on, Helen. The poor woman just lost her husband. Helen looked at me for a second and then turned around to talk to the kids. Later, Emily invited me to Gary's funeral, which I did. Luckily in the UK, mortgages are insured so Emily wouldn't be left with nothing. Emily's parents were back from Europe and they talked to me after the funeral. The next time Helen went to pick up the kids she stayed in the car, which I was fine with because I didn't want to talk to her. Emily and I didn't spend a lot of time together, but we weren't a couple, we were friends who supported each other. After dinner, Emily helped me prepare dinner and it was obvious she was skilled in the kitchen. After dinner, she helped me clean up and sat with us for a while before heading home. On Sunday afternoon Helen came to pick up the children and I knew they would tell her about Emily having dinner with us, and I guessed correctly that the next time Helen came to pick up the children she took a special interest in Emily. I expressed my strong opposition to him adopting our children and emphasized that he had taken my wife and ruined our marriage. Helen pouted and walked home, but I laughed because I knew I had made her angry. A year later I hadn't seen Emily for a couple of weeks, partly because I was very busy. My friend Paul was rewiring a young couple and he had asked me to put in a bid to rewire a complete pipeline. My bid was accepted and I was busy for a couple weeks getting everything done. I finally had some time to relax. I decided to ask Emily out to dinner. She agreed and we made a date for Saturday night. When I walked up behind Emily she took my breath away. She was a petite woman with a pixie-cut hairstyle. She wore a dress that emphasized her slim figure. For the first time I began to be attracted to her. The dinner went well and we spent a lot of time talking. We spent a lot of time discussing our lives. That evening I walked Emily to the door and she thanked me. I smiled in response and before I could reply she gave me a passionate kiss that took my breath away. She suggested we go out again and see where things would go, then bid me goodnight and kissed me on the cheek. Despite her petite stature, Emily was very passionate and that made me very happy, and as Emily and I spent more and more time together, she eventually sold the house and moved in with me. The kids were happy with my dating life and obviously they would tell Helen, who wasn't happy about it. She didn't want me but Emily did. Emily and I went on to have 2 children, Gary and Robert. My older children were now old enough to visit on their own, which reduced my contact with Helen. I was frustrated with Chloe's behavior and Emily suggested using the money from the sale of her house to pay for the wedding. I hesitated considering it was her money, but she insisted and encouraged me to inform Chloe that we would pay for the wedding. The next day Chloe told me that Henry was very angry and Helen was obviously upset. One afternoon Lee suddenly appeared in the garden of her house, wanting to leave the house as he didn't want to listen to his mother and Henry arguing anymore. Emily asked if they were still arguing about the wedding, but Lee revealed that it was about something else, mentioning that he had overheard an intimate moment of theirs. We laughed together about the circumstances and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction that Helen had left me for someone who couldn't fulfill his responsibilities at a critical time. The church ceremony went well and I agreed to let Helen sit at the top table of the wedding party while Henry sat with Emily, Robert, Gary and Lee. After all the speeches were over the caterers moved a few tables to make room for the dancing. Josh and Chloe led the first dance and Emily and I and Helen and Henry joined them. Lee asked Emily if she wanted to dance and I encouraged him to go for it. Helen took the opportunity to approach me. She'd obviously had a few drinks and I had a feeling this meeting wasn't going to end well. Helen continued to belittle Emily and I defended my wife by telling Helen that Emily was more of a woman than she was. I even hinted at the satisfying intimacy of my life with Emily and Henry joined in the conversation, which left Helen dumbfounded. I pointed out to Helen that when she left me she thought she was trading up for something better. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't, but I had moved on. I had a life of my own, a loving wife and 4 lovely children. I walked away leaving Helen and Henry to their own devices. Emily and I danced to the slow music. As we danced she asked me about my exchange at the bar. I asked her to kiss me and promised to explain later. We shared a kiss. I knew Helen was watching us. When I broke the kiss I smiled at Helen. Helen turned to order another drink. As I looked at Emily I couldn't help but think that in my life I did trade up for something better.